imagine a ticking clock. But this isn't counting down to like a product launch or a New Year celebration or something.
But the stakes are a little higher here.
Yeah, way higher. It's counting down to a moment that could fundamentally reshape global shipping, energy markets, and just international security as we know it.
Absolutely.
We are looking at a 48-hour ultimatum. This was issued by President Trump, and it's set to expire at exactly 7:44 p.m. on a Monday, Washington, D.C. time.
Which is a very specific, hard deadline.
It is the demand. Open the Strait of Hormuz,
Yeah.
and the threat, if it's not open, he said he's going to open the gates of hell.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff.
It really is.
Yeah.
But before we go any further, I need to be absolutely crystal clear with you, the listener. The source material we're unpacking today, it's a really dense, high-stakes military and geopolitical briefing from Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis.
Right.
And it contains very strong political opinions. I mean, it features heavy, pointed critiques of current U.S. and Israeli leadership, as well as their military strategies.
It definitely pulls no punches.
Right. And our purpose in this deep dive is not to endorse or condemn any of those political viewpoints. We are not taking sides here.
No, not at all. We're just looking at the data.
Exactly. Our only goal is to impartially unpack the strategic, logistical, and, historical arguments presented in this original briefing so you can understand the underlying dynamics at play.
Which are incredibly complex.
So complex. So, okay, let's unpack this. We have this massive 48-hour ultimatum, but the source immediately takes that really high-level political threat and just slams it into the very grim physical reality happening on the ground.
Yeah, the briefing really draws our attention to recent missile strikes to illustrate a critical shift in the nature of this conflict.
Right.
Specifically, the source highlights strikes on the Israeli city of Dimona, which resulted in 59 hospital casualties. But miraculously, no deaths were reported in that specific incident.
Wow. Yeah, and there was another one too, right?
Yeah, there was another strike in the city of Arad, leaving 80 people wounded, some of them seriously.
So what really stands out in the briefing isn't just the locations, but the visual evidence the source provides. I mean, it shows incoming missiles hitting their targets directly without being intercepted at all.
Which is a huge detail.
It is, and it makes me wonder, because we always hear about the Iron Dome being this, impenetrable shield.
Right, the ultimate defense.
Yeah. If it's the best integrated air defense system in the world, how is it failing to stop this incoming fire?
Well, it really comes down to basic mathematics and what military planners call magazine depth.
Magazine depth.
Yeah. So an air defense battery, like the Iron Dome, it only holds a finite number of interceptor missiles at any given time. Usually it's around 20 per launcher.
Okay.
And the Horse argues that Iran's strategy doesn't actually rely on building, super stealthy missiles that evade radar.
Oh, I see.
Instead, they just rely on sheer volume. So if a defense system has 60 interceptors ready to fire, and the adversary launches 70 relatively cheap drones or ballistic missiles all at once,
Oh, wow.
yeah, those last 10 projectiles are going to hit their targets, simply because the defense system has run out of ammunition. It needs time to reload.
So it's not a failure of the technology itself, it's just a failure of inventory.
That is the core argument here. Exactly.
What's fascinating.
Right. We've basically moved past a short, sharp clash and entered into what is fundamentally a war of capabilities, a war of attrition.
Right.
The United States and Israel just lack the physical inventory of interceptor missiles and what the source calls long-range standoff weapons required for a really sustained, drawn-out war.
Wait, let me pause you there. When the source says long-range standoff weapons, what exactly does that mean in this context? Are we talking about drones or specific types of missiles or what?
It refers to any weapon, so like a cruise missile or an advanced glide bomb that can be launched from a safe distance.
Okay.
Like well outside the range of the enemy's retaliatory anti-aircraft fire.
Yeah.
You literally stand off at a distance and fire.
Oh, I get it. The name makes sense.
Yeah, and the briefing points out that these highly sophisticated weapons, they take a really long time to manufacture.
Which is a problem if you're burning through them.
Exactly. We are now on day 23 of this specific escalation. And rather than running out of steam, Iran has actually increased its daily rate of fire.
Wait, really? Increased it?
Yeah. Furthermore, the source notes that Iran initially used its older stock, but is now deploying newer, much more powerful missiles that are successfully penetrating that defensive shield.
Man, it makes me think of like a high-stakes poker game where someone goes completely all in with a super aggressive ultimatum.
Right.
But looking at the source material, it forces you to ask, does the U.S. or Israel actually have the chips to back up that bluff quickly?
See, a poker game implies bluffing and psychology, but the source frames this purely as an industrial supply chain problem.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Think of it more like a retail CEO launching this massive global holiday sale,
Yeah.
but the warehouse floor is completely empty.
Oh, wow. That's a great analogy.
Right. The defense is struggling because there is a fundamental lack of Western industrial capacity to quickly manufacture million-dollar replacement interceptors to shoot down thousands of relatively inexpensive incoming threats over a long war.
The math just doesn't work.
It really doesn't.
So if the math shows our defensive shield is failing because we simply can't manufacture interceptors fast enough, the logical military pivot is to look at offensive strategies,
I
right?
think so, yeah.
Like, you have to destroy the launchers before they fire. But the source completely dismantles the current offensive strategies proposed by Allied leaders, arguing that they are mathematically flawed too. Why is that?
Well, the briefing outlines the stated objectives of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and his goals are what military analysts call maximalist.
Maximalist meaning what, exactly?
He has stated the intent to completely break Iran's nuclear program, completely break their missile program, and basically create the conditions for the overthrow of the Iranian regime itself.
Those are massive goals.
Very massive.
And to rally international support for those goals, the source notes Netanyahu is making some very specific claims, right?
Yes.
He claims that Iran intentionally targeted holy sites, specifically the Western Wall, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and the Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Right, which obviously stirs up a lot of deep emotion globally.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And he also stated that Iran fired an intercontinental ballistic missile, an ICBM, 4,000 kilometers away at Diego Garcia.
Now, that specific detail about Diego Garcia is crucial to unpack here.
Yeah, why is that so important?
Diego Garcia is a highly militarized atoll in the central Indian Ocean. It's jointly used by the U.S. and the U.K.,
Okay.
and it is a massive staging ground for long-range bombers and naval fleets.
So it's basically a major hub.
Exactly. By pointing out an ICBM strike aimed there, the argument being made to the international community is that this is no longer just a localized Middle Eastern conflict.
Right, because firing a weapon 4,000 kilometers into the Indian Ocean demonstrates a reach that threatens global staging areas.
Exactly. The source views these statements as an explicit attempt by Netanyahu to urge Gulf Arab states and European nations to physically join the war.
But the briefing asks us to look at the reality of the target they're actually trying to dismantle with this proposed coalition.
Yeah, you have to look at the target.
Iran is a country of 93 million people, and their military infrastructure isn't like a single Pentagon building you can just target from the air, right?
Far from it. The military is divided into 31 highly decentralized military districts.
31?
Yeah, and they utilize extensive underground logistics and bunker systems spread across a massive geographic area.
So they're dug in.
Very dug in. They have spent decades burying their missile production and launch facilities inside mountains, specifically to withstand American air power.
Here's where the logistics get really fascinating to me. It sounds like trying to take down a massive, decentralized cloud computing network, like a giant server farm using a sledgehammer.
That's actually a really good way to put it.
You can swing the hammer and smash a few servers. You might even cause a localized outage.
And that localized damage might look great on a satellite photo or on a news broadcast.
Right, you get the big explosion on TV.
Exactly. But the network architecture is designed to survive precisely that kind of blunt trauma.
The data just shifts.
Exactly. The network reroutes to the other 30 districts, and the system just continues to launch missiles.
Man.
The source leans heavily on historical precedent to prove you simply cannot kill your way to victory from the air against a decentralized, determined population.
Right. The briefing mentions massive historical bombing campaigns, doesn't it? Like the firebombing of Japan, the Nazi blitz on Britain, the immense ordnance dropped on North Korea and North Vietnam.
Yeah, and in none of those cases did massive bombardment alone bring those entities to their knees or result in an immediate, unconditional surrender.
If anything, it usually hardens the population's resolve.
Exactly. The source is very pointed about the math here.
Sure.
It argues that even if you drained every single offensive missile from the American and Israeli inventories, like completely emptying the warehouses we just talked about,
Right.
you wouldn't achieve that total state collapse because the targets are simply too numerous and too deeply buried.
Okay, so air power won't do it, but what about a ground invasion? The source mentions hypothetical operations, like using the 82nd Airborne or Marine Expeditionary Units to take Karg Island, which is a major Iranian oil terminal.
Taking an island or a specific terminal is a tactical success, sure, but the analysis is that it would not change the strategic outcome.
Because it wouldn't actually open the strait.
Right. It wouldn't magically open the Strait of Hormuz because the anti-ship missiles threatening the strait are fired from mobile launchers on the mainland mountains, not just the islands.
I see.
The core insight here is the massive disconnect between demanding unconditional surrender and the actual ordnance and manpower available. The maximalist goals simply do not align with the physical resources at hand.
So, if a clean military victory is logistically impossible due to the math of attrition and the geography of decentralization, historical precedent usually suggests the only way out is diplomacy.
You find an off-ramp.
Exactly. But the deep dive into this briefing reveals a pretty chilling assessment. That off-ramp is entirely blocked.
Yeah, the briefing cites Iranian Foreign Minister Arashi, who bluntly states that diplomacy is just off the agenda.
Wow. Off the agenda completely.
Completely. And the reasoning he provides is crucial to understand the geopolitical gridlock we're in.
What's his reasoning?
He claims that during previous negotiations, the United States promised they had no intention to attack, yet proceeded to attack them while negotiations were allegedly still making progress.
Oh, wow.
Right. And whether one agrees with that assessment or not, the Iranian stance is that trust is fundamentally broken, making talking no longer a viable option for them.
So we have a situation where Allied leadership is demanding total regime collapse and unconditional surrender, but they lack the physical munitions to actually force it.
Yep.
Meanwhile, the diplomatic channels to negotiate a lesser settlement are completely closed. It reminds me of the geopolitical concept of mutually assured destruction, or at least a severe breakdown in deterrence.
How do you mean?
Well, if you tell a regime they are going to be overthrown no matter what they do, they have literally no incentive to hold anything back. You've cornered them.
That is exactly right. And that leads directly to the warnings of Professor Morandi from the University of Tehran, who is cited in the briefing.
Right. What does he say?
He warns of a scorched earth response. He argues that if the U.S. acts on this 48-hour ultimatum, Iran will not just strike military targets.
They'll go bigger?
Much bigger. They will initiate a massive expansion of the war, targeting neighboring Arab family dictatorships, regional oil infrastructure, and critically, desalination plants.
Desalination plants. That detail from the source really stopped me in my tracks.
It's terrifying.
Because destroying oil infrastructure cuts off the economic lifeblood of those countries. But destroying desalination plants cuts off the physical lifeblood. It's the water supply.
Exactly.
But surely, a wealthy Gulf state could just import water in a crisis, right?
The logistics of that are actually physically impossible, and that is why it is such a terrifying strategic threat.
Right.
We are talking about sustaining millions of people in a desert environment.
Right.
A single person needs roughly a gallon of water a day just to survive, let alone for sanitation or agriculture. You cannot easily load enough water onto ships, offload it into ports that might also be under attack, and truck it deep into the desert fast enough to prevent a mass humanitarian catastrophe.
Wow. Just the sheer volume of water needed.
It can't be done. The source emphasizes that without those plants, it is unclear if the populations of some of those neighboring countries could even survive a prolonged conflict.
Because the breakdown of trust means there is no partner for a negotiated settlement, the Iranian regime sees radical regional escalation threatening the basic water supply of its neighbors as its only path for survival.
Which brings us to a really stark contrast in the briefing. We've just spent time outlining a mathematically driven reality of failing interceptors, impossible military goals, and a blocked diplomatic off-ramp.
Yeah.
But the force points out that when you look at how this is being portrayed by political and media elites in the U.S., it's like a completely different universe.
The disconnect is staggering.
It really is.
The source highlights a specific example. Fox News pundit and former Congressman Jason Chaffetz. His public prediction was that right as the ultimatum expires on the 49th hour, the Strait of Hormuz will simply open, the oil will start flowing freely again, and global oil prices will drop right back down to around $60 a barrel.
Yeah, and the briefing absolutely tears into this prediction, labeling it a total intellectual failure.
Because it completely ignores everything we just talked about.
Exactly. Based on the logistical realities we've discussed, the source's own prediction is the exact opposite. If the U.S. attacks to enforce the ultimatum, The anticipated Iranian retaliation against regional energy infrastructure won't just keep the strait closed. It will cause global oil prices to skyrocket, well over $100 a barrel.
Over $100 a barrel.
Easily.
Yeah.
And it's not just about the physical flow of oil, it's about insurance premiums for shipping companies becoming prohibitively expensive, which immediately trickles down to the cost of basically everything.
And it's not just the media pundits making these optimistic predictions. The source points to a social media post from President Trump himself.
Right.
Right in the middle of this crisis, with the strait closed and missiles flying, he posted that Iran is dead, while simultaneously pivoting his message to blame domestic political rivals, specifically calling out the radical left Democratic Party.
And the source views that kind of messaging as highly erratic and disconnected from the operational reality on the ground.
I mean, yeah.
To claim an adversary is dead when they are actively and successfully launching missiles that deplete your air defenses, and while a major global choke point remains firmly closed, it just shows a profound misunderstanding of the opponent's remaining capabilities.
It's like watching a CEO confidently looking at a booming stock chart, assuring investors the company has already won the holiday season, while the warehouse floor manager is staring at completely empty shelves and broken delivery trucks.
Exactly.
How is it possible that leadership and punditry can have such a vastly different read on the situation than the hard logistical reality presented in this briefing?
Well, the source suggests that this elite consensus is relying heavily on an outdated paradigm.
Outdated how?
They are operating on the assumption of rapid, overwhelming American military dominance. You know, the idea that a single threat or a few targeted strikes will immediately force compliance, sort of like it might have in the 1990s.
But the first half of this briefing was dedicated to proving that this paradigm is no longer logistically feasible.
Precisely. And it's because of what military strategists call asymmetric warfare.
Right.
This is when a weaker power uses unconventional tactics, cheaper technology, or geography to exploit the vulnerabilities of a much stronger power.
So they don't fight fire with fire.
Exactly. Iran doesn't need to build a massive air force to counter the U.S. Air Force. They just need to build enough cheap drones and buried missiles to mathematically exhaust the U.S. supply of interceptors.
It's just a numbers game to them.
It is. The source argues that acting on that outdated assumption of easy dominance, like by striking energy infrastructure to enforce an ultimatum, for example, will not open the strait. It will simply trigger reciprocal, catastrophic attacks on allied infrastructure.
Okay, let's pull all these threads together. The source material we examine centers on an expiring 48-hour ultimatum that threatens massive escalation. It details a war of attrition where the sheer mathematical volume of incoming fire is beginning to overwhelm Western interceptor inventories. It critiques Allied leadership for holding maximalist political goals that completely ignore historical precedents and the geographic reality of decentralized militaries.
And perhaps most dangerously, it outlines the total collapse of diplomatic trust, leaving a scorched-earth escalation targeting even the basic water supply of neighboring nations as the only perceived option for a cornered regime.
We really have to connect all of this back to you, the listener, because it is very easy to listen to a deep dive like this and treat it as a distant, abstract, geopolitical chess match.
Yeah, it can feel like just dots on a map.
It feels like something happening in a situation room thousands of miles away. But the source makes it clear that this isn't abstract. When a crucial choke point, like the Strait of Hormuz, remains closed, and when energy infrastructure is targeted, it directly impacts global shipping.
The cascading effects are immediate.
Exactly. It impacts the price you pay at the gas pump. It creates massive economic ripples that affect the cost of groceries, inflation, and the daily lives of everyone listening, regardless of where you live. The stakes are profoundly personal.
Which leaves us with a critical question to consider, one that builds on the reality presented in this briefing but goes beyond it.
What's that?
If overwhelming military force can no longer guarantee strategic goals in an era of decentralized asymmetric warfare, and if trust in diplomacy is completely broken, what exactly is the mechanism for resolving 21st century conflicts before they trigger a permanent global economic crisis?